The Kethrani were the most feared species in the known galaxy, and everyone on Station Velthary 9 understood exactly why this was true. They stood 8 feet tall when fully grown, with bodies made of pure muscle and covered in short, dark fur that shifted colors depending on their mood. Their eyes held vertical pupils like those of ancient earth cats, and their retractable claws could slice through metal as easily as a knife through soft bread. Their fangs were legendary among spacefaring species, capable of puncturing hull plating if a Kethrani warrior truly wanted to cause damage. Every other species gave them space when they walked through the station corridors. The small Yilix traders would press themselves against walls. The proud Vorlich security officers would find reasons to look at their datapads. Even the crystalline Celesi, who feared almost nothing in the universe, spoke to Kethrani with careful respect. This was simply how things worked aboard Velthary 9, a massive trading station that floated in neutral space between a dozen different territories. Here, species from across the galaxy came to trade goods, negotiate treaties, and conduct the endless business of interstellar civilization. The Kethrani Dominion had sent Ambassador Verith to represent their interests, and he had brought his family with him as was customary for long diplomatic assignments. Ambassador Verith was an impressive figure even by Kethrani standards. He stood taller than most of his kind, with silver streaks in his dark fur that marked him as a veteran of many battles. His golden eyes had seen wars begin and end. His voice could silence a crowded room with a single word. He was exactly what one would expect from a representative of the galaxy's most dangerous predator species. But Verith was also a father, and his 3-year-old daughter Syrah was the light of his existence. Syrah was small for her age, barely reaching her father's knee, with soft fur that had not yet darkened to adult colors. Her eyes were wide and curious, and her tiny claws had not yet learned to retract properly. She loved to chase clean drones through the station corridors, and had recently discovered the joy of pouncing on unsuspecting crew members' feet. The station staff had grown fond of the little predator, even if her playful attacks sometimes drew blood. Everything changed on what should have been an ordinary station day. The power fluctuation came without warning, as such things often do in space. One moment the lights were bright and steady, and the next moment everything went dark for exactly 7 seconds. Emergency systems kicked in with red flashing lights and loud alarms that echoed through every corridor. For most species, this was merely an inconvenience. Power fluctuations happened sometimes, and stations had backup systems for exactly this reason. But for little Syrah, who had been walking with her nursemaid through an unfamiliar section of the station, those 7 seconds of darkness and noise were absolutely terrifying. When the lights returned, the nursemaid found herself alone. Syrah had bolted into the maze of cargo bays that made up this section of the station, her small form disappearing faster than anyone could follow. The nursemaid immediately called for help, and within minutes the situation had escalated beyond anything the station had seen before. Syrah had entered what the Kethrani called Velshira, a state that every spacefaring species had learned to fear. When Kethrani cubs became truly frightened, their instincts took complete control. Their bodies flooded with chemicals that heightened every sense and every reflex. They became, in essence, tiny killing machines operating on pure survival instinct. Station security found her in Cargo Bay 7, crouched between 2 massive shipping containers. Her fur stood on end, making her appear twice her actual size. Her small fangs were fully bared, and she emitted a sound that was part hiss, part growl, and part something that operated below the range of normal hearing. That subsonic rumble was the worst part. It triggered fear responses in nearly every species, a biological weapon that evolution had given the Kethrani to freeze prey in place. Experienced security officers found themselves wanting to run, their bodies screaming danger, even though their minds knew it was just a frightened child. The first handler who approached learned exactly how dangerous a Kethrani cub in Velshira could be. He was a trained professional who had worked with Kethrani families for 20 years, but Sira moved faster than his eyes could track. Her claws raked across his arm, opening 4 deep gashes before he could even think about retreating. He stumbled backward, blood dripping onto the deck plates, his face pale with shock. A second handler tried a different approach, moving slowly and speaking in the soft tones that usually calmed distressed cubs. Sira launched herself at him with a shriek that made everyone nearby cover their ears. He barely escaped with a torn uniform and scratches across his chest. When the Vorlik security chief tried to use a containment field, Sira somehow sensed it coming and attacked him directly. He was a large being covered in natural armor, but the cub found the gaps between his plates with terrifying precision. He had to be carried to the medical bay while Sira retreated to her corner, hissing at anyone who came near. Ambassador Verith arrived to find his daughter had become a danger to everyone around her, including herself. He paced outside Cargo Bay 7, his massive claws gouging deep scratches into the metal floor with each step. His golden eyes kept returning to the security feeds that showed his little girl, his precious Sira, lost in a state of primal terror. Every instinct told him to rush in there and hold her, but he knew better. Even he could not safely approach a cub in Velshira. She would not recognize him. She would see only a threat. Station Commander Tavel watched the situation with growing concern. The crystalline being's faceted surface flickered with colors that indicated deep worry. Tavel understood exactly what was at stake here. If the cub harmed herself, the Kethrani Dominion might blame the station. If someone harmed the cub while trying to restrain her, the Dominion would definitely blame the station. Either scenario could damage relations between the Dominion and the Galactic Trade Coalition, possibly even leading to conflict. But beyond politics, Tavel also saw a terrified child and a desperate father, and that sight moved even a being made of living crystal. "We will find a solution," Tavel said to Verith, though the words felt hollow. "The station has resources from 100 different worlds. Surely something will work." Verith turned his golden eyes toward the commander, and Tavel saw something rarely witnessed by other species. The great predator ambassador was afraid, not for himself, but for his child. His voice came out rough and heavy. "She cannot stay in Velshira forever. Her body will exhaust itself. Her heart could fail. Kethrani cubs have died this way, Commander. My daughter could die while we stand here unable to help her." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and every being who heard them understood the terrible truth. Time was running out for little Sira, and no one had any idea how to save her. The next 6 hours became a parade of failure that no one on Station Velthary 9 would ever forget. Commander Tavel called upon every resource available, reaching out to specialists from dozens of different species. The station was home to representatives from across the galaxy, and surely someone would have the knowledge or technology to help a frightened child. The Melodari were the first to answer the call. They were a species famous throughout known space for their empathic abilities, beings who could sense emotions and project calming feelings into troubled minds. Their healers had helped countless species through psychological trauma, and they approached the situation with quiet confidence. 3 Melodari empaths entered Cargo Bay 7, their tall, slender forms moving with careful grace. They kept their distance from the cub and began to project waves of peace and safety toward her. Their methods had calmed raging warriors and soothed dying patients. Surely a frightened child would respond to their gifts. But Sira was no ordinary frightened child. The Velshira state had turned her mind into a fortress of pure survival instinct, and the Melodari found themselves pushing against a wall of raw, primal terror. The more they tried to project calm, the more her instincts pushed back. The feedback became overwhelming, and all 3 empaths collapsed to their knees. clutching their heads in pain. They retreated with what they called psychic burns, their harmonic frequencies shattered by the experience. One of them needed medical attention for a nosebleed that would not stop. They apologized to Ambassador Verith with genuine sorrow in their large, dark eyes, but they could not help his daughter. Next came the Gulwathi, a species that had evolved on a world filled with dangerous pack predators. They had developed powerful calming pheromones over millions of years, chemicals that could soothe even the most aggressive beasts on their homeworld. Their representative, a broad being covered in thick gray hide, assured everyone that Kethrani biology was similar enough for the pheromones to work. A small drone carried the pheromone dispersal unit into the cargo bay, releasing clouds of the calming chemicals into the air around Syrah. Everyone watched the security feeds with desperate hope. Syrah sneezed once, her tiny nose wrinkling at the strange smell. Then she pounced on the drone and tore it apart with her small claws, scattering pieces across the cargo bay floor. The pheromones had done nothing except annoy her. The Gulwathi representative shook his massive head sadly and withdrew. His species had never encountered a predator that did not respond to their pheromones, and he had no other solutions to offer. A Yilix physicist named Kren proposed a more technological approach. The Yilix were small beings with brilliant minds, known across the galaxy for their innovations in energy manipulation. Kren had been studying predator neurology as a hobby and believed he understood what was happening inside the cub's brain. The Velshira state is maintained by specific neural frequencies. Kren explained to Commander Tavel and Ambassador Verith. If we create a low-frequency sound barrier around the cub, we might be able to disrupt those frequencies and allow her higher brain functions to regain control. It was a reasonable theory backed by actual science, and everyone agreed to let Kren try. Specialized speakers were brought into the cargo bay and positioned carefully around Syrah's location. Kren monitored everything from a safe distance, adjusting frequencies and amplitudes with delicate precision. For a moment, it seemed to work. Syrah's growling quieted slightly, and her fur began to flatten. Ambassador Verith leaned forward, hope bright in his golden eyes. Then Syrah's ears rotated toward one of the speakers, and her expression changed from fear to rage. The sound was not calming her. She perceived it as a trap, an invisible cage closing around her. With a shriek of fury, she launched herself at the nearest speaker and destroyed it completely. Then she destroyed the second speaker, then the third. Kren watched in horror as equipment worth more than most starships was reduced to sparking debris. He quietly gathered his remaining tools and left the cargo bay, muttering apologies that no one really heard. The hours continued to pass, and more solutions were attempted. A Drexy healer tried using bioluminescent patterns that supposedly triggered relaxation responses in most mammalian species. Syrah ignored the lights completely and continued to hiss at anyone who approached. A Varnathi sonic specialist attempted a different approach with sound, using harmonics instead of frequencies. The result was the same as before, with more destroyed equipment and an even more agitated cub. Someone even suggested simply waiting for Syrah to exhaust herself, letting nature take its course. Commander Tavel carefully raised this option with Ambassador Verith. "She will tire eventually," Tavel said, choosing words with extreme care. "In approximately 47 hours, her body will begin to shut down the Velshira state naturally." Verith's response was immediate and fierce. His claws extended fully, and for a terrible moment, everyone thought he might attack the commander. But he controlled himself, though his voice shook with barely contained emotion. "She could die before then, Commander. Kethrani cubs have died during prolonged Velshira. Their hearts give out from the strain. They refuse food and water. They injure themselves trying to escape threats that exist only in their minds." His voice cracked, and the sound was heartbreaking. "My daughter is 3 years old. She is alone and terrified, and you want me to wait while her body destroys itself?" Tavel had no answer. The crystalline being's surface dimmed with genuine sympathy, but sympathy would not save the cub. Ambassador Vareth turned back to the security feeds, watching his daughter pace in frantic circles between the cargo containers. Every few minutes she would lunge at shadows, her small body burning energy it could not afford to lose. Her fur had started to look dull, and her movements were becoming slightly unsteady. She was weakening, and everyone knew what that meant. Throughout the station, word spread about the situation in Cargo Bay 7. Species that normally avoided each other gathered in small groups to discuss the tragedy unfolding on their station. Many had children of their own, and the thought of watching a child suffer this way touched something universal in their hearts. But no one had any new ideas. The best minds and most advanced technologies had failed. What else could possibly be done? In a maintenance corridor not far from Cargo Bay 7, a human cargo specialist named Elena Chun sat eating noodles from a container and watching the whole disaster on her personal datapad. She had been following the situation for hours, her meal growing cold as she focused on the security feeds. Most beings on the station had already dismissed any possibility of humans being helpful. Humans were relative newcomers to galactic society, a species with no special abilities or remarkable technologies. They were considered adaptable and sometimes clever, but certainly not equipped to solve a problem that had defeated empaths and physicists and specialists of every kind. Elena Chun watched the feeds anyway, her dark eyes tracking every movement the cub made. Something about the situation tugged at her memory, a connection her mind was trying to make. She could not quite grasp it yet, but she knew it was there, waiting to be understood. She set down her noodles and leaned closer to her datapad, studying the frightened cub with an intensity that no one else on the station would have thought to apply. Elena Chun had lived on Station Velthary 9 for 2 years, and in that time she had learned something important about humanity's place in the galaxy. Humans were not special in the ways that other species valued. They were not the strongest, like the Kethrani or the Gorwathi. They were not the smartest, like the Yilix whose mathematical abilities bordered on supernatural. They were not blessed with empathic gifts like the Malodari or crystalline immortality like the Celesi. By galactic standards, humans were thoroughly unremarkable. But humans had one quality that other species often overlooked. They were observers. They watched, and they learned, and they made connections that others missed. Perhaps it came from evolving on a planet filled with predators much stronger than themselves. Perhaps it came from being a species that had survived by understanding other creatures rather than overpowering them. Whatever the reason, humans had a talent for seeing patterns. Elena was particularly good at this. She had grown up on Earth in a small house with 3 cats and a mother who worked as a veterinary technician. She had spent her childhood watching animal behavior, learning to read the subtle signals that creatures use to communicate. She had started a degree in animal behavior at university, but had never finished it. Life had taken her in different directions, eventually leading her to the stars and a job moving cargo on a space station. But she had never stopped watching. She had never stopped trying to understand. Now she sat in her maintenance corridor, noodles completely forgotten, studying the security feeds from Cargo Bay 7 with intense focus. She watched the Kethrani cub pace and growl and swipe at things that were not there. She watched the way the small body moved, the way the ears rotated, the way the tail lashed back and forth. Something was wrong with the picture, and not just the obvious fact of a terrified child. Something about the cub's behavior did not match what everyone assumed was happening. Elena pulled up everything the station database had on Kethrani Velshira. The information was limited but useful. The state was triggered by extreme fear. The cub's brain became flooded with survival chemicals. Higher thinking shut down. The cub became essentially feral, operating on pure instinct. All of this matched what Elena was seeing, but it did not explain everything. She watched the cub press herself into a corner between two cargo containers, and she saw something interesting happen. For just a moment, Sierra's growling quieted. Her fur flattened slightly. Her breathing seemed to slow. Then she looked at the open space around her and immediately became agitated again, leaping away from the corner and resuming her frantic pacing. Elena rewound the footage and watched again. The same pattern repeated. Whenever Sierra managed to wedge herself into a tight space, she showed brief moments of reduced panic. But the cargo bay was too open, too vast, with too many directions that threats could approach from. She could not stay calm because she could not find anywhere that felt truly safe. The cub was not just afraid, Elena realized. She was overstimulated. The huge cargo bay was overwhelming her senses. The bright lights, the echoing sounds, the endless open space with no barriers to hide behind. Every instinct in her small body was screaming that she was exposed and vulnerable. Elena thought about her cats back on Earth. She remembered how they would squeeze into boxes and cabinets and any small space they could find. She remembered reading about why cats did this. Small enclosed spaces made them feel safe and secure. The walls blocked out stimulation and created a barrier between them and the world. It was not just preference. It was a deep biological need. Kethrani were not cats, obviously. They were an entirely different species from an entirely different world. But they were predators, and predators often shared certain instincts. The need for a safe den, a secure space where they could rest without worrying about threats, was common across many predator species throughout the galaxy. What if that was what Sierra needed? Not calming pheromones or empathic projection or high-technology solutions. What if she just needed somewhere small and dark and enclosed where she could feel hidden from the universe? Elena jumped to her feet, her mind racing. The station had plenty of small spaces, but nothing portable that could be placed near the cub. She needed something she could bring into the cargo bay, something the cub could claim as her own. She remembered a shipment that had arrived last week from the Terran cargo freighter Adelaide. The ship had been carrying compressed industrial components, packed in containers made from a material that most galactic species considered primitive and strange. Cardboard. Processed plant fiber pressed into rigid sheets. Humans had been using it for centuries to make boxes for shipping and storage. It was cheap, lightweight, biodegradable, and completely unremarkable. Most galactic species had stopped using such primitive materials long ago, preferring plastic polymers or metal alloys. But the Adelaide was a human ship with human cargo, and humans still loved their cardboard boxes. Elena ran to the cargo storage section and found what she was looking for. A single cardboard box, approximately 1 meter square, sitting empty in a corner where someone had tossed it after unpacking its contents. It was brown and plain and slightly dented on one side. It was the most ordinary object imaginable. Elena picked it up and tucked it under her arm. Then she made her way toward Cargo Bay 7. She encountered resistance almost immediately. Station security had set up a perimeter around the cargo bay, and they were not interested in letting anyone through, especially not a human cargo worker carrying a box made of plant fiber. "This area is restricted," a Volix officer told her firmly. "Ambassador's orders. No one enters without authorization." "I think I can help," Elena said. "I think I know what the cub needs." The officer looked at her, then at the box, then back at her. His expression suggested he was trying to decide if she was joking. "You want to help the Kethrani cub with a paper container?" "It's cardboard, actually," Elena said. "And yes, I do. Human. We have had empaths and scientists and specialists of every kind try to help that cub. They all failed. What makes you think a cargo worker with a box can succeed where they could not?" Elena did not have a good answer to that question. She only had a theory based on watching the security feeds and remembering her cats from childhood. It sounded insane when she thought about it. A cardboard box solving a problem that had defeated the best minds on the station? But she had to try. She had watched that cub for hours, and she was certain she understood something that no one else had noticed. The cub did not need someone to fight her fear. She needed somewhere to hide from it. "Please," Elena said, "just let me talk to Commander Tavel. If my idea is stupid, I will leave quietly and never bother anyone again. But if there is even a small chance I am right, should we not try?" The Vorlix officer stared at her for a long moment. Something in her eyes must have convinced him, because he eventually stepped aside and activated his communicator. "Commander Tavel, there is a human here who claims she can help the cub. She wants to speak with you and the ambassador." There was a pause, and then Tavel's crystalline voice came through the speaker. "Send her in. At this point, we will try anything." Elena walked through the security perimeter, carrying her cardboard box like it was the most precious cargo in the galaxy. Maybe it was. Commander Tavel and Ambassador Verith both stared at Elena Chun with expressions that mixed confusion and desperate hope. The human stood before them holding a brown box made of compressed plant fiber, looking remarkably calm, considering she was proposing to enter a cargo bay with a feral predator cub. She was small by galactic standards, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that held steady certainty. "Let me understand this correctly," Tavel said, their crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated bewilderment. "You believe that this container made of paper will succeed where Melodari Empaz and Yilix technology and Gawathi pheromones all failed." "Cardboard," Elena corrected gently. "And yes, I do believe that." "How?" Ambassador Verith demanded. His voice was rough with exhaustion and fear. He had been watching his daughter suffer for nearly 7 hours now, and his patience had worn dangerously thin. "Explain to me how a primitive container could possibly calm my daughter when nothing else has worked." Elena took a breath and organized her thoughts. She knew how insane this sounded, but she also knew what she had seen in those security feeds. "Your daughter is not just afraid," she said. "She is overwhelmed." The cargo bay is huge and open, with bright lights and echoing sounds and no barriers to hide behind. Every instinct in her body is telling her she is exposed and vulnerable. She keeps trying to find a safe space, pressing herself into corners and gaps between containers, but nothing works because there is always open space around her. She held up the cardboard box. This gives her what she needs. A small enclosed space with walls on all sides. Somewhere she can hide from the world while her body calms down. The box is neutral, with no threatening smells or sounds. It is not alive, so it cannot hurt her. She can claim it as her den, her safe space, and hopefully that will allow her instincts to relax. Verith stared at the box as if seeing it for the first time. Something shifted in his golden eyes, a flicker of recognition that Elena could not quite interpret. "Kathrani mothers create nesting spaces for newborn cubs," he said slowly. "Small, dark, enclosed areas where the cubs can feel protected. We stop using them when the cubs grow older, but perhaps the instinct remains." "That is exactly what I am counting on," Elena said. Tavel's crystalline form brightened slightly. "The theory has some logical basis. But how do you propose to get the box near the cub without being attacked? She has injured everyone who has approached her." Elena had thought about this carefully. "I will not approach her. I will enter the cargo bay, place the box on the floor with the open side facing her, and then retreat to the far corner. I will sit down and ignore her completely. If I am right, her instincts will eventually drive her to investigate the box. If I am wrong, well, at least we tried something new." "And if she attacks you before you can retreat?" Verith asked. His voice carried genuine concern, which surprised Elena. "You are small and fragile by galactic standards. My daughter could kill you before anyone could intervene." Elena smiled slightly. "Then I will be the fourth person to visit your medical bay today. But I do not think she will attack me. She is not hunting right now. She is hiding. If I do not act like a threat, she should not treat me as one." There was a long silence as Vareth and Tavel considered her words. Elena could see the struggle in the ambassador's eyes. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hope that this simple solution might work, but he had already watched so many attempts fail. Finally, Vareth nodded slowly. "Try it. At this point, I will accept any chance to help my daughter, no matter how strange it seems." Elena squared her shoulders and walked toward the cargo bay door. Every being who had been watching the situation gathered around the security feeds, holding their breath as the small human prepared to enter the danger zone. The door slid open, and Elena stepped inside. The cargo bay was exactly as chaotic as the feeds had shown. Destroyed equipment littered the floor, and claw marks scarred several containers. The air smelled of stress pheromones and fear. And there, crouched between two massive shipping units, was Sira. The cub's head snapped toward Elena immediately. Her lips peeled back to reveal small fangs stained with dried blood. That terrible subsonic growl began again, the sound that made every instinct scream danger. Elena felt her body want to run, felt the ancient fear response that all prey animals carried in their genes. She did not run. She walked slowly and steadily to the center of the cargo bay, keeping her movements calm and predictable. She did not look directly at the cub. She did not speak or make any sudden gestures. She simply carried her cardboard box to an open area floor and set it down gently. The box sat there, open side facing Sira, completely ordinary and unthreatening. Elena turned and walked to the far corner of the cargo bay. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, pulled out her datapad, and pretended to read. Outside, everyone watching the feeds held their breath. Ambassador Vareth's claws had extended fully, ready to order his warriors to rescue the human if the cub attacked. Commander Devel's crystalline form had gone completely still. But the attack did not come. Sira's growling faded to confusion. This was not how prey behaved. The human was not running, not screaming, not trying to approach. She was just sitting there, ignoring the cub completely. And there was this strange object in the middle of the floor that had not been there before. Minutes passed in tense silence. Elena kept her eyes on her datapad, though she was not actually reading anything. She was listening, tracking the cub's movements through sound alone. She heard small footsteps approaching the box. Then she heard sniffing sounds as Sira investigated this new object. The box did not move. It did not make sounds. It did not smell like anything threatening. It was just there, offering its small enclosed space to anyone who wanted it. More minutes passed. Elena heard the footsteps circle the box several times. She heard tentative scratching sounds as small claws tested the cardboard walls. Then she heard the most beautiful sound she had ever experienced in her life. She heard a small body climbing into the box and settling down inside. Elena risked a glance and saw exactly what she had hoped to see. Sira had climbed into the cardboard box and curled into a tight ball. The walls of the box surrounded her on all sides, blocking out the overwhelming vastness of the cargo bay. The overhead lights could not reach her. The echoing sounds were muffled. For the first time in 7 hours, she was somewhere that felt safe. The growling stopped completely. The subsonic rumble faded away. Sira's fur began to flatten against her body, returning to its normal position. Her breathing slowed from frantic panting to gentle, regular rhythms. And then, impossibly, wonderfully, the little predator cub began to purr. Outside the cargo bay, Ambassador Vareth made a sound that no one had ever heard from a Kethrani warrior. It was something between a laugh and a sob, an expression of relief so profound that it seemed to shake his entire body. Tears formed in his golden eyes, and he did not bother to hide them. "She is calm," he whispered. "My daughter is calm." Elena sat in her corner, still pretending to read her datapad, and allowed herself a small smile. The cardboard box had worked. Sometimes the simplest solutions really were the best ones. 45 minutes later, Ambassador Verith entered the cargo bay to find his daughter fast asleep in a cardboard box. Purring softly, with a human cargo worker sitting nearby still pretending to be interested in her datapad. He approached the box carefully and looked down at his sleeping child. Syrah's small face was peaceful, her breathing deep and even. The Velshira had ended, replaced by the normal exhaustion of a cub who had been awake far too long. Verith lifted his eyes to look at Elena Chun, and the human saw something in his gaze that she would remember for the rest of her life. Gratitude beyond words, respect beyond measure, and something that might have been the beginning of a friendship between two very different species. "Thank you," he said simply. 2 words that carried the weight of a father's entire heart. Elena nodded and rose to her feet. "You are welcome, Ambassador. I am just glad I could help." She walked out of the cargo bay, leaving the father to watch over his sleeping daughter, and the entire station seemed to release a breath it had been holding for 7 long hours. The story spread across the galaxy like light spreading from a new star. Within days, everyone on Station Velthary 9 had heard about the human cargo worker who had saved the Kethrani, Ambassador's daughter with a cardboard box. Within weeks, the story had reached 100 other stations and colonies. Within months, it had become one of the most discussed events in recent galactic history. Xenopsychologists from dozens of species wrote research papers about the incident. Enclosed spaces as neurological reset mechanisms in apex predator species became required reading at 15 major universities. Academic conferences were held to discuss the implications of Elena Chun's simple solution. Experts who had spent decades studying Kethrani psychology admitted they had completely overlooked the obvious. The Kethrani Dominion responded in a way that surprised everyone. Instead of being embarrassed that an outsider had solved a problem their own experts could not, they embraced the lesson with characteristic directness. The Dominion's High Council reviewed the incident and immediately ordered changes to how Kethrani ships and stations were designed. 10,000 cardboard boxes were manufactured and distributed to every vessel in the Dominion fleet that carried families. The boxes were classified under official military terminology as juvenile pacification equipment and stored in easily accessible locations. Instruction manuals were written explaining how and when to deploy the boxes during cub distress situations. Some Kethrani warriors initially complained about the indignity of it all. Their proud species, the most feared predators in the galaxy, using paper containers to calm their children? It seemed almost embarrassing. But those complaints faded quickly when the results became clear. Cub Velshira incidents dropped by 60% across the Dominion. Cubs who did enter the distress state could be calmed in minutes rather than hours. Families reported that their children were happier and more secure, knowing that a safe space was always available. The cardboard boxes became symbols of something unexpected: the willingness of the Kethrani to learn from others. Elena Chun found herself becoming famous, though she did not particularly enjoy the attention. News services from across the galaxy wanted interviews. Universities offered her honorary degrees. A Melodari entertainment company asked to make a documentary about her life. She turned down most of the requests. She was a cargo worker, she explained, not a celebrity. She had simply noticed something that others had missed and tried a solution that made sense to her. There was nothing heroic about it. But Ambassador Verith was determined to ensure that Elena's contribution was properly recognized. He understood better than anyone how close he had come to losing his daughter, and he would not let the galaxy forget who had saved her. At the next meeting of the Galactic Assembly, where representatives from every major species gathered to discuss trade agreements and territorial disputes, Verith rose to address the chamber. His massive form commanded attention as he stood at the speaking platform, golden eyes scanning the assembled delegates. A Vorlix diplomat had just finished a speech dismissing humanity as an unremarkable species with little to contribute to galactic civilization. Humans were minor players, the diplomat argued, barely worth considering in matters of importance. Verith waited until the Vorlix had finished speaking, and then he told the assembly about the day his daughter was saved by a cardboard box. His deep voice carried through the vast chamber as he described the terror of watching Syrah in Velshira. He told them about the empaths and scientists and specialists who had all failed. He told them about the human cargo worker who had watched the security feeds and understood something that no one else had seen. "You measure value in strength," Verith said, his words echoing off the chamber walls. "In technology, in conquest. These are the things our species have always respected. But the humans measure value differently. They measure it in understanding." He paused, letting his words sink into the minds of every delegate present. Elena Chun looked at my child and saw not a predator, not a danger, not a problem to be solved with force. She saw a frightened creature who needed to feel small and safe. That understanding, that ability to see through different eyes, is not weakness. It is wisdom that our galaxy has forgotten. His golden eyes found Elena in the visitors' gallery. She had been invited to attend the assembly session, though she had tried to refuse. Now she sat among diplomats and dignitaries, wearing her simple cargo worker uniform, looking thoroughly uncomfortable with all the attention. "Humanity may not be the strongest or the smartest," Verith continued, "but they understand living things in ways that the rest of us have lost. They share their worlds with creatures they call pets, animals they care for simply because they enjoy their company. They study the minds of other species not to control them, but to understand them. They see the universe not as something to conquer, but as something to know." He raised one massive hand toward Elena. "This human saved my daughter's life with nothing more than observation and a paper container. If that is not valuable, then I do not know what value means." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, delegates from a dozen different species began to signal their agreement. The Melodari swayed gently, their empathic abilities confirming the truth of Vereth's words. Even the Vorlix diplomat who had dismissed humanity looked thoughtful. Elena found herself becoming something she had never expected to be, a symbol of humanity's place in the galaxy. She was offered positions at xenobiology institutes and diplomatic training programs. The Kethrani Dominion invited her to become their official consultant on child development, a position that would have made her one of the most influential humans in known space. She turned them all down, every single offer. "I like my job," she explained to Ambassador Verith when he personally asked her to reconsider. "I like moving cargo and solving problems and being left alone to do my work. Fame and influence are not things I want." Verith studied her for a long moment, and then he laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that made nearby beings nervous, but Elena recognized it as genuine amusement. "You humans are truly strange," he said. "Any other species would seize the opportunities you have been given. But you want to remain a cargo worker. Someone has to move the boxes," Elena said with a small smile. Verith laughed again and nodded. "Then move your boxes, Elena Chun. But know that you will always be welcome in the Kethrani Dominion. My family owes you a debt that can never fully be repaid." He did accept one way to honor her. He commissioned a formal portrait to be hung in the Kethrani Hall of Honored Allies, a sacred space where only the greatest friends of the Dominion were remembered. The portrait showed Elena sitting cross-legged on the cargo bay floor, reading her datapad, while a small Kethrani cub slept peacefully in a cardboard box beside her. The plaque beneath the portrait read, "She understood what we had forgotten, that even predators need a place to feel safe." Years passed, and the story of the cardboard box became legend. Human cargo ships began carrying extra boxes in their holds, just in case some alien species needed them. Xenopsychologists developed new theories about predator behavior based on Elena's insight. Kethrani cubs across the Dominion grew up with cardboard boxes in their nurseries, never knowing a time when such things were considered strange. And Elena Chan continued to work on Station Valkyrie 9, moving cargo and solving problems and watching the universe with eyes that saw what others missed. Sometimes young beings would approach her, having heard the famous story, and ask how she had known what to do. "I watched," she would tell them. "I paid attention. I tried to understand what the cub was feeling, instead of assuming I already knew. That is all. Anyone could have done it." But that was exactly the point, and the lesson that the galaxy was slowly learning. Humans succeeded not because they were special, but because they tried to understand. In a universe full of species focused on power and technology and conquest, that simple gift of observation and empathy was rarer and more valuable than anyone had realized. And across the galaxy, on stations and ships and planets beyond counting, cardboard boxes became symbols of humanity's quiet wisdom. Just simple paper containers, waiting to offer safety to anyone who needed a place to hide from an overwhelming universe.